Every incident writes a unique narrative. Every investigation seeks objective facts. Securing your legal rights, uncovering real justice.
We got a stolen vehicle report. Can I see papers?
What's your reasonable cause for this search?
I don't owe you an explanation. Documents now.
You are making a serious mistake. I want to know the legal basis for this
I'm not going to ask you again. Don't make this into something it doesn't need to be, woman.
I am complying, and everything you are doing right now.
So, picture this. It's a warm October afternoon in Jefferson County, Texas. A federal judge is 8 minutes from a hearing that could change the lives of entire communities poisoned by an oil and gas operation that had been running unchecked for years. She's calm, she's prepared, she's ready, and then blue and red lights appear in her rearview mirror. Now here's what that sheriff did not know. There were 2 cameras recording every single second of what he was about to do. And the woman he just pulled over will later be the one to put him behind bars in a conspiracy that shook the county and gave $33 million in class action. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know if you enjoyed the story. Let's continue. The afternoon light over Jefferson County fell clean and unhurried, the kind of October warmth that made the flat Texas landscape look almost peaceful, wide sky, sparse traffic, long stretches of road bordered by scrub grass, and the occasional industrial silhouette rising against the horizon. Inside her black Mercedes-Benz E-Class, Judge Sakina Augustine was 8 minutes from the federal courthouse. 8 minutes from the beginning of a hearing, years in the making. Her mind was already in that courtroom. She moved through the opening arguments methodically, not rehearsing so much as confirming, the way a surgeon checks instruments before a procedure. The communities she was about to represent had been breathing and drinking the consequences of an oil and gas operation's negligence for over a decade. Elevated cancer rates, contaminated groundwater, children with lung conditions their parents couldn't afford to treat. Today was the day that evidence would be presented before a federal court, and the weight of it sat on her shoulders with the quiet, familiar pressure of everything she had ever worked toward. She did not see the patrol vehicle until the lights came on. Blue and red stroked into her rearview mirror, without warning, no prior tale, no preamble, no visible cause. Judge Augustine registered the signal with the composed precision of a woman who had spent 20 years reading rooms that wanted to dismiss her. She activated her turn signal. She checked her mirrors. She guided the Mercedes into the parking lot of a nearby bank, pulling well off the road and into a marked space with calm, deliberate intention. Both hands returned to the wheel, 10 and 2. She waited. The officer who approached moved with his hand near his weapon before he had covered half the distance between his patrol car and her window. His posture carried the weight of a decision already made, body angled forward, jaw set, eyes scanning the vehicle with the practiced appraisal of someone who had already formed a conclusion. His name was Brian Goldberg, Jefferson County Sheriff. 16-year veteran of a department that had, in those same 16 years, accumulated a quiet and well-buried record of complaints from the very communities now suing the industry he had quietly agreed to protect. He told her there had been a stolen vehicle report. He did not offer a report number. He did not explain how the report had been generated, who had filed it, or why a vehicle registered and insured to the woman sitting calmly before him had triggered it. When she asked, measured, unhurried for the report number, the question landed in the space between them and stayed there, unanswered. She passed her credentials through the window. Not just her license and registration, her gold-embossed federal judicial identification, the document that identified her as a sitting United States District Judge with the full weight of federal authority behind her name. Goldberg held it for 4 seconds. His eyes moved across it with the studied disinterest of a man who had already decided what he was looking at. Then he handed it back, told her it could be fake, and ordered her out of the vehicle. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She announced every movement before she made it, hands visible, door opening slowly, feet on the pavement, both arms extended. Every motion was deliberate and precise, the kind of measured compliance that comes not from fear but from the cold understanding that composure, in this moment, was the most powerful thing she possessed. She was acutely aware that her dash cam was recording. She was also aware, though she kept her face entirely still, that Goldberg's body cam was clipped to his chest and running. He searched the Mercedes without consent and without a warrant. He moved through the interior with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed no consequence would follow him. When he was finished, he placed her in handcuffs. The metal bit into her wrists, tight, unnecessary, the kind of tightness that communicates something beyond procedure. She was guided to the back of his patrol car and seated there while the clock moved past the time her hearing was scheduled to begin. It was then that his personal phone rang. The call came through the patrol car's interior, audible, unmuffled, captured in full fidelity by the body cam still rolling on his chest. The voice on the other end carried no particular urgency, which made it more damning, not less. The caller confirmed what had been arranged. The judge in the black Mercedes was to be delayed long enough for the day's evidence to miss the hearing. The phrasing was casual, almost administrative. The stop had not been spontaneous. It had been coordinated. Augustine, seated in the back, heard every word. She did not react visibly. Instead, she began quietly, internally cataloging. Title 18 of the United States Code. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law. She built the list in her mind with the same methodical precision she had used to build everything else, each charge settling into place like a document filed correctly, stamped, and ready for the record. At the federal courthouse, her missed security check-in triggered an immediate escalation. She had not called ahead. She had not been delayed by traffic or a scheduling conflict. She had simply not arrived, and for a sitting federal judge with a known active case and a security protocol, silence of that kind was not something that went uninvestigated. Within minutes, her clerk had initiated a welfare check. Within 30 minutes, United States Marshals and FBI field agents were mobilizing, their vehicles converging first on the bank parking lot where her Mercedes sat with its hazard lights still blinking quietly against the afternoon light, and then on the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Inside the patrol car, Brian Goldberg ended his call and glanced toward the back seat with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had handled something cleanly. He had not noticed what both cameras had captured. He had not calculated what would happen when the audio from that call was extracted, enhanced, and played inside a federal courtroom. He had not imagined what the next 90 minutes would set into motion. He told no one in particular, his voice easy and unhurried, that she would not be making that hearing today. He was right about that. But the hearing, as it turned out, was only the beginning of what he had just made inevitable. The holding cell at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office was functional and indifferent fluorescent light, painted cinder block, the low ambient hum of a building that had processed hundreds of people without ever questioning the authority doing the processing. Judge Sakina Augustine sat inside it with her spine straight, her hands resting in her lap, and her tailored suit carrying not a single concession to the hours she had spent in it under circumstances designed to diminish her. The handcuffs had been removed when she was placed in the cell. The composed stillness she had carried on the roadside had not left with them. The moment federal agents arrived at the facility, the atmosphere of the building changed in a way that institutional spaces rarely recover from. The department captain, a man who had spent his career moving through the comfortable middle distance between authority and accountability, received the information in stages, each one visibly worse than the last. The woman in holding was a sitting United States district judge. The stop had been recorded on 2 separate cameras. Federal marshals were already in the building. The captain's face moved through several expressions before settling into something that could only be described as the particular pallor of a man realizing he had no version of the next hour that ended well for him. Augustine watched him process it. She did not speak. She did not need to. In the decades between her childhood in Jefferson County and the bench she now occupied, she had learned that silence, deployed with precision, communicated more than most arguments. She had grown up less than 12 miles from where she now sat in a neighborhood that had spent years filing complaints about contaminated groundwater, about air quality that left a chemical aftertaste on warm mornings, about children who developed respiratory conditions that doctors in more resource zip codes rarely saw. Those complaints had been filed, logged, and quietly buried. The agency responsible for investigating them had found nothing worth pursuing. The sheriff's department responsible for protecting those communities had found nothing worth investigating. She had not forgotten any of it. What she had done, instead, was rise steadily, methodically, through law school and the public defender's office and a federal clerkship and eventually to the bench itself, while keeping, in the quietest part of her professional life, a separate and meticulous record. For 18 months, she had been the anonymous source at the center of an active FBI probe into Goldberg's department. The tips were surgical in their precision: account numbers, meeting dates, the names of deputies who had accepted payments, the specific reports that had been altered or withheld entirely. The kind of information that could only come from someone who understood federal evidentiary standards, who knew exactly what agents needed and in exactly what form, and who had access to the case architecture that only a federal judge would ever see. The agents reviewing her file in the building's conference room made the connection in the first 20 minutes. The body cam footage was cued and played in full. The dash cam footage followed immediately after. Both ran without interruption, and when the segment containing the phone call reached the room, the voice on the other end of Goldberg's personal cell, calm and specific and devastating, the room did not produce commentary. It produced the particular silence of professionals confronting evidence that removes every remaining ambiguity from a case they had been building for a year and a half. As the damning audio of the arranged delay filled the room, and the full weight of the stop settled over everyone present, one could not help but wonder, would Sheriff Goldberg have pulled over a white federal judge driving the same luxury car and dismissed her credentials with the same contempt? If racial bias feels central to what happened on that roadside, drop a yes or no in the comments below, and share this with someone who needs to witness what real accountability looks like when the evidence is undeniable. The investigation that followed moved with the velocity of a federal operation that had already been doing its groundwork. Bank records were subpoenaed. Encrypted communications were unlocked. A 15-year financial trail began to surface deposits that did not align with public salaries, transfers routed through intermediary accounts, payments that corresponded with precision to the dates on which specific pollution complaints had been buried, specific witnesses had been discouraged from testifying, and specific pieces of physical evidence had disappeared from chain of custody documentation. Goldberg had not been operating alone. 5 deputies had taken payments. Together, they had built a quiet infrastructure designed to ensure that the communities downstream of the oil and gas operation never accumulated enough legal momentum to threaten it. The amounts were not incidental. The payments to Goldberg alone exceeded $400,000 across the documented period. The deputies had collectively received an additional $260,000. These were not casual favors. They were retainers' ongoing compensation for the sustained suppression of an entire community's right to legal protection. Augustine was released from the holding cell 91 minutes after she had entered it. She walked out of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with her credentials in her hand and her posture unchanged. Federal agents had already executed search warrants on Goldberg's home, his department vehicle, and 3 auxiliary storage locations flagged in the investigation's supporting documents. Goldberg himself had been placed in federal custody before the end of the business day. His 5 deputies followed within hours. The indictment carried 10 federal counts: conspiracy to obstruct justice, deprivation of rights under color of law, bribery of a public official, obstruction of a federal proceeding, witness tampering, evidence tampering. The document was 47 pages long. It named each defendant, each transaction, each date, each witness who had been pressured into silence, each report that had been falsified or destroyed. Outside the building, the afternoon light was beginning to soften toward evening. Augustine did not give a statement to the press. She did not pause for photographs. She walked to the vehicle that had been arranged for her, sat down, and for the first time in several hours, allowed herself to be still in a way that was not performance. The case she had been building in silence for a year and a half had just broken open into daylight. The man who had placed her in handcuffs and informed an industry-linked contact that she would not be making that hearing was now sitting in the same federal detention system she had spent her career working within. And the work, the actual work, the part that would matter to the families who had been breathing contaminated air and filing ignored complaints for a generation, was only now beginning. She had never expected the road to this moment to be clean. She had only ever expected it to be worth it. The federal courthouse in Houston absorbed the trial the way it absorbed everything, with the impassive grandeur of an institution that has witnessed enough human failure to have stopped being surprised by it. The proceedings against Brian Goldberg and his 5 deputies ran for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony, financial documentation, forensic audio analysis, and synchronized footage that played on courtroom screens with the unambiguous clarity of evidence assembled by people who had been waiting patiently and methodically for exactly this moment. Goldberg sat at the defense table with the stiffened posture of a man managing the distance between his public face and his private understanding of how completely everything had collapsed. His attorneys had pursued suppression motions against the body cam and dash cam footage in the pretrial phase, arguing procedural grounds with the kind of legal creativity that surfaces when the underlying facts offer no better defense. Every motion had failed. The footage was admissible. The audio from the phone call was admissible. The bank records, the encrypted message threads, the testimony of 3 former witnesses who had been pressured into silence and had now agreed to testify, all of it was admissible and all of it came in. The prosecution presented the phone call first, not buried in the middle of its case first, in the opening week, before the financial records and before the witness testimony, so that every subsequent piece of evidence would be received by the jury already knowing what kind of operation they were evaluating. The audio filled the courtroom with the same casual specificity it had carried in the back of the patrol car 9 months earlier, the arranged delay, the calculated obstruction, the confirmation of a plan laid out in advance by people who had believed, with the comfortable confidence of the long protected, that there would be no recording, no consequence, and no reckoning. There were 12 jurors. They deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. The verdict on every count was unanimous. Sentencing came 6 weeks after the verdicts. The judge, presiding brought in from the Southern District on a conflict of interest recusal, addressed the courtroom with the measured gravity of someone who understood exactly what had been done and to whom. He spoke about the meaning of a badge in a democratic system. He spoke about the specific violence of institutional betrayal, the particular harm that occurs when the people authorized to protect a community use that authorization as cover to exploit it. He sentenced Goldberg to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He sentenced the 5 deputies to terms ranging from 8 to 18 years, with full pension forfeiture and permanent decertification from law enforcement in every jurisdiction within the United States. Every badge stripped, every pension voided, every certification permanently revoked. The civil proceedings had been running in parallel, moving on a separate track with the relentless momentum of a case that had both the evidence and the public attention required to sustain it. Augustine had formally recused herself from the original environmental pollution hearing the day after her release from the holding cell, a recusal she had been prepared to file the moment the investigation moved into its public phase. What no one had fully anticipated was what she did next. She joined the legal team representing the affected communities as co-counsel. The class action lawsuit combined 2 streams of injury into a single unified claim: the civil rights violations arising from the Sheriff's Department's years of racially discriminatory enforcement and witness intimidation, and the environmental harm suffered by communities whose complaints had been systematically suppressed to protect the oil and gas operation responsible for the contamination. The plaintiffs numbered in the hundreds. The documented harm spanned 15 years and touched nearly every family in 3 Jefferson County neighborhoods. The evidence base, built in part on the same investigative record Augustine had been quietly compiling for 18 months, was formidable. The jury deliberated for 4 days. The verdict, when it came, was $33 million, the largest civil judgment of its kind in the region's recorded legal history. The award was split between the civil rights claimants and the environmental harm plaintiffs, structured to reflect not just documented damages, but the sustained, deliberate nature of the institutional failure that had allowed those damages to accumulate unchecked across a decade and a half. The reforms that followed were immediate and structural. A federal consent decree was entered against the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and extended, by agreement, to 7 additional law enforcement agencies across East Texas. The decree mandated independent civilian oversight, redesigned bias and accountability training, mandatory public reporting on vehicle stops disaggregated by race and outcome, and a 10-year monitoring period with quarterly federal review. The oil and gas operation, facing the full evidentiary record of what its payments had purchased, negotiated a separate remediation settlement that included environmental cleanup commitments, community health monitoring, and the establishment of a regional fund for affected residents. None of it was enough to return what had been taken. It rarely is. But it was real. It was documented, it was enforceable, and it was won. On the afternoon of the press conference following the civil verdict, Judge Sakina Augustine stood at a podium outside the Houston Federal Courthouse in her judicial robes, surrounded by attorneys, community advocates, and the quiet presence of people who had filed complaints into a void for 15 years and had lived long enough to see those complaints answered. She did not perform the moment. She did not raise her voice or reach for language larger than the facts already were. She spoke about the communities she had come from. She spoke about the process, the long, unglamorous, methodical process of building a case that could not be dismissed, of accumulating evidence in silence while watching the powerful operate in the confidence of their own impunity. Brian Goldberg was processed into a federal correctional facility the same week. He arrived in Prison Orange, stripped of the title and the badge and the department vehicle and the structural authority that had allowed him for 16 years to decide which lives in Jefferson County were worth protecting and which were not. The 5 deputies who had accepted payments and buried complaints and intimidated witnesses entered the same federal system shortly after. The woman he had pulled over in a bank parking lot because she was black and driving a car, he had decided she had no right to own the woman he had handcuffed on a public road while informing an industry contact that she would not be. Making that hearing was standing at a federal courthouse podium, leading the charge for the communities that had been neglected since long before she had risen from them. The cameras that recorded everything were still running. They always had been.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Integrity is a lifelong quest, and education remains your strongest asset. Thank you for tuning in and promoting institutional transparency.